INDX Global. In conversation with Arc Daily and Design Boom, powered by Woodvisor.
Good morning. I can still say good morning.
Good morning.
It's still quite early. Thank you, all of you, for joining me. I'm Claire Broadka. I'm managing editor here at Design Boom. We are at Milan Design Week with INDX Global, hosting a couple of podcast sessions, and I'm very happy to have you here to talk about the indo-global dialogue. I'll just ask you to introduce yourselves quickly, and then we can start with just having a beautiful conversation. Should we start with you?
Hi, I'm Niroop Reddy, Principal NA Architects, India and Dubai.
I am Sujit. I run a firm called SDEG in Bangalore. We've been around for about 15-20 years now, I think. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Hi, I'm Aman. I'm the founding partner of a firm called Charge Voids. We are a multidisciplinary practice based out of Chandigarh.
Thank you all. So I'd love to kick us off with kind of a, quite broad question. You can answer this as broad or as specific to your own practices or your own experiences or with examples as you like. But I'm curious to hear from you how, the Indian narrative is currently being redefined on the global design stage. What are you seeing that maybe you haven't seen, in years before? Is there a shift that currently is taking place with regards to, India-specific practice when it comes to architecture and design that's kind of spreading throughout? I'd love to hear from you about that. Yeah, good.
Yeah, me? All right, okay. Well, I definitely think there's a shift in the way we're perceived, I think, in the West, the architecture practice from India. And I think that has something to do with, just going back a little bit, I feel like there was a phase, the Indian modernism was recognized, it was very well known. We had our own version. It wasn't, it was a Western import, but completely sort of rooted in our context. And there was a bit of a lull through the 90s, and that's particularly because we went through a phase of liberalization. So this is a time when suddenly we were looking at a very global image for our work. There were glass buildings, and there was all of that. It was also a time for some of us to actually come to the West, finish up an education, because it opened up boundaries back then. And when we get back now in the 2000s, I'm seeing a lot of questioning. There's a conversation around what it really means to be an architect in India in conversation with what's happening in the West. So I think that conversation's become very interesting, where now suddenly there's a conversation around craft, there's a conversation around a real recognition of our past. Those conversations were not happening earlier. And I find it very exciting.
And necessary, probably.
Yes, absolutely. So I also think that there's the media in India is also evolving and maturing, and the conversations are now more visible, and that's very important as well, so that we are heard.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things that is happening now is because there's a lot of infra push that's happening in the country, and there's a lot of development, a lot of construction activity that's going on in India. So the focus is gradually shifting. A lot of these large Indian developers are always sort of looking for foreign architects, so to say.
Right.
And a lot of these foreign practices, they're coming in, sort of starting their work. It's sort of made the space more competitive, but I think it's also, what it's done is, it's sort of, for the Indian architects, they have to raise their bar. But at the same time, a lot of these practices, a lot of good Indian practices who were doing contextually sensitive work, they've started coming to the fore. And also the global media has started paying attention to, their work now, which mostly went unnoticed. And like Sujit said, what happens is that, because we were sort of always amalgamating our past with the Western aesthetic, Western modernism, and where I come from, it's the place where sort of this Western modernism was imported in a way. Corbusier was the first guy who came to Chandigarh, and it was like the place. But now the evolution has happened, and we are in a very mature place where we know how to build contextually with the Western modern aesthetics, but keeping the Indian spatial planning intact and all those kind of things intact. So I think that new kind of modernism is what is catching the global attention now.
Actually, from the beginning, I think Indian architecture or Indian architects had an eye for detail, or we had a very good detailed craftsmanship happening in India. I mean, when it comes to interior design, when it comes to architecture, we had very good buildings which were already sustainable when no one knew what was sustainability. Right. But it's most of the buildings what were made in 1900s, 1800s were all very sustainable because they never had any air conditioning, they never had any kind of electricity, but still they had good ventilation, they had good airflow and all that. So what we missed in I think 1990s and 2000s, we just we were carried away by the Western modernism, right. Like use of more glass for the facades and making the buildings very modern but not effective in design. But what as Indian architects we are good at, we are very good at, like when we are giving like very tight spaces, not proper sides, like very tight sides. So we know how to design. We're very good at getting the maximum out of the space. Right. So we're very good at spatial design. So we're very practical in design. So that's very important. I think even now I practice from outside India. I do some projects in Dubai. But for me to be there successful was one thing. It's like do very quick response, which is like most of our Indian architects have that. And the second thing is, do a good spatial planning and a very sensible planning. And again, stick to the given budget. I mean, always right. In India, we used to have those kind of budget for any project we have. So we always get to do within those budgets and within the design limits we have. But we used to create good buildings, and that is helping us to actually go global, and it's getting our practices more easier to go global.
Thank you. I guess a follow-up question to that would be, now that, or when you come to places like this, Milan Design Week or any other kind of more global fair where you're in touch, with colleagues from other countries, do you find that there has been kind of like a growing curiosity for your specific practice? Like, are you met with, interest, curiosity, or is it something where you feel you have to, be more of an ambassador for Indian kind of architecture as a whole? Or do you feel like there's growing, understanding maybe also of that shift, to try and kind of reclaim your own style in a way?
Yeah, I think I'm both optimistic and a little concerned about that position, because sometimes I personally sense that there's a sort of expectation of the kind of work that emerges from India, the aesthetic and the sort of positioning. It's good, I think, in some sense. It's almost like a sort of a new India image that's emerging from our context. But having said that, there are a lot of firms doing lovely work that sort of goes under the radar. I think it's also because it's not extremely sort of craft-induced work, but it's work that solves problems. It's well-resolved work. I think those practices deserve recognition as well. I think it's because maybe the West, they might see similarities between what's already happening in the West and these projects in India as well, because the resolution is not what is creating the excitement, and it doesn't create that image. Right. And I think that may be a bit of a concern, but I think that's just an ongoing kind of investigation. It'll probably get better. It also has something to do with the scale of projects that seems to be grabbing attention from India. They're invariably small private commissions. You don't see large infrastructure projects, for example, or large kind of institutional projects being published a lot. And I think maybe it's just a matter of time, and maybe that's just work in progress. I think.
Yeah, and I think as you rightly said, this, all of what we spoke about earlier, this kind of detaching yourself from the, Western modernist influence, 1990s, 2000, that's not long ago. I think, when we're thinking about the timeline, like this is still a very fresh development, right? Has your both experience been the same? Do you feel like you need to kind of defend what's happening, or like explain what's happening maybe?
Well, I think, there are 2-3 aspects to this. I think the first thing that is there is, this idea of frugality that he was talking about. So, a lot of us Indian architects can work with very limited budgets to create things that are genuinely very efficient, and aesthetically pleasing as well. Buildings that are functional, but buildings also that would last the time. It's not that it's substandard construction. That's one aspect of it. Secondly, obviously, we have this sort of advantage, I'd say, that, we can still do buildings that are very labor intensive in nature. We can do crafting with brick, which is very easy. You can do a lot of work in situ. So that sort of advantage or that sort of factor is something, that's very reflective in our work. And it's unlike the mechanized construction processes of the West, right? And thirdly, I think as Indian designers, we are used to sort of going with the flow of the things, where we are sort of innovating as the things are going, because everything is not there in black and white always. Construction processes are not that organized, like here in the West. So it allows us that freedom to sort of innovate as we go along. And even for the larger infrastructure projects or large commissions, like in doing, large institutional projects, the attention is slowly coming. I genuinely feel that the Western media has just started looking at the large infrastructure projects that the Indian architects are building, and some of them are really amazing. They're really contextual projects, and like Niroop said, that sustainability is something that's been the core of Indian way of living. It's not something that we need to sort of think about simultaneously. It's ingrained in the way we think and the way we design and the way how construction happens in the country.
For sure. Do you want to also comment on what I guess your reactions have been that you've been met with when you come to like global events like these? Do you feel like you're playing ambassador? Do you, what's the reaction that you get just on a global stage, I suppose?
Yeah, most of the times, I've been traveling to this fair from 2006, 2005. And always I feel we have better craft in India, better furniture, better detailing, everything, but why we are not being showcased in the global level. Mm-hmm. So that was always my concern.
Yeah.
So we used to come here, as a knowledge sharing, or just to see new things happening and just to keep ourselves updated. But always, we were not very excited with the things here, because this has been, we've been seeing these things in India also, but they're not marketed well or globally placed well. So that has been always my concern of thing. Still we are, architecture wise we're doing good, but when it comes to product design and product related things, there are a lot of people doing good designs, but they're not being exposed globally.
Right.
Yeah. So I think maybe in the future coming years, probably more exhibitions. I think from last 5 years, there have been little participation from India in the design fair. It's been increasing every year. So number of participants have been increasing. Hopefully, it keeps on and people recognize
definitely
Indian craft and design.
And I think it comes back to what you were saying. With it's still an ongoing process, right? It's still a young process. So, but I'm glad to hear from you that you feel like there's momentum, and I feel like and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it is growing kind of exponentially, right? Once I think the first domino is moving, I hope that that just keeps going. Did you want to add to?
No, I was just thinking as an example. we don't have representation at the Biennale, the Architecture Biennale, for example. And that is a sort of melting pot in some sense of what's happening in the world every 2 years or so, right? And I think that's maybe, those are the kind of platforms that will eventually allow us to, create an impact perhaps on the way we function, the way we think, and, our current sort of processes. I can think of, between us, 50 or 100 practices in India that are doing great work. And this particular platform, some of the firms that are here are not always necessarily on front in the, in the conversation. Yes, yeah. Yeah, and it's because we're sort of working in our own little ways. I think there's a search, and then maybe we're on to something. So that will eventually kind of come out in maybe conversations like these, I think.
Sure. That's why, that's why we're doing this, and hopefully that will help. I think another thing that, I'd love to hear from you about is the educational aspect, because I've spoken with some of your colleagues about, even when they were, being trained as architects or designers, there was a very, heavy influence of you mentioned Corbusier earlier, of these influences from the West, of these ideals, of these standards. Do you feel like in India currently, and I'm if from your own personal practice, or maybe you're associated with universities, but do you feel like there's a shift happening in the educational aspect, in what's being taught and how architects and designers are being taught?
You take that, yeah.
Okay, so I think education has become very interesting now, because education is not, I don't think it's very instructional in nature now, because the way things are, and the advent of the internet, the AI, everything, you can just, it's not happening inside a classroom anymore. And I think the idea of experiential learning it's really taking for example, I'd quote Chandigarh in this case, because you mentioned Corbusier, and so a lot of these young sort of architects and students, they've been experiencing that sort of Western architecture in Chandigarh for a very long time, right? So they know what's good, what's bad. And similarly, a lot of cheap imitations happened. So, people have started understanding, okay, if you sort of imitate without sort of building sensibly, or sort of trying to do things which are just really flamboyant and eye-catching, but they don't work. So, that sensibility started creeping into the education sector now. And it's got to do not with the syllabi or with the teachers. I think it's got to do more with the exposure now, because, everybody is so exposed to things, and, people are traveling, people are looking at things much more, you're experiencing things through your devices all the time. So, you've that understanding or the basic level of design experience is gone up. Right. I think that's what is influencing
how people maybe educate themselves also.
Yes, how the education sector is shifting.
Right. You want to comment on that as well?
I think always our education system has been good, but it's just that we were not taught, how to make so today design is all about storytelling, right?
Yes.
So we, as Indian architects, I would say we are really bad at that. We do very good design, very sensible design, very economical design, but when it comes to how to put it like in a global platform, because now a lot of global firms are successful in India or somewhere because how they put in the narrative, how they put in the story. So we do a better design, but we don't know how to put that, because maybe architects, like I have not studied abroad, maybe Sujit and they have studied, so at least they know, architects who have studied abroad, that's the only education difference I see between, the approach to design, one, another one is how to make the design talk. So
I like that,
yeah. So that we miss as Indian art, that education was missing, but as Aman said now, because today design is all about, for me design is all about exploring new materials.
Right.
So see, then when I want to explore new materials, it's about your, you see different places, you go around places, experience the new buildings, experience even the old structures and learn something from them and try to, do a better design.
I think that's really interesting that you mentioned the storytelling aspect, because I agree with you. I think, and this is what you were saying earlier as well, that, you know, it's just these big firms that are coming in to India to, like, you know, they have star architects, I hate that word, but let's go with
I
it,
think-
attached to it, right? And then the whole idea of a star architect came about because of the storytelling. Right?
Yeah, I think most of the Indian architects now have kids like who wants to pursue architecture. We are sending them out for education, like for the Bachelor of Architecture or for the Masters, just because at least they learn the skills of presentation and the storytelling, and which is becoming very important in design nowadays, unfortunately.
But hopefully, I mean, hopefully that also leads to shifts within the
Yeah.
Indian education system of
Yeah,
architecture,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
eventually, hopefully that comes back around to faculty being able to teach that at Indian universities, so you don't have to send kids out,
yeah.
right?
It was always technically sound.
Yes.
The architecture was technically sound, but yeah, this we were missing. Sorry.
No, that's an important point you make, because I think that's exactly what's happening. So in some of the schools in the country now, professionals have started feeding back into these schools, and it means that there is now a mini kind of shift in the way the students are thinking, and I think that's how it works, right? It's cyclical in that sense. So it's like, just going back to my earlier point about our fraternity kind of exploring for the last 15, 20 years, traveling, studying abroad, coming back, and then kind of questioning what's conformist in our country, which is really this modern lineage, and then trying to see whether there's a way to question that through our education abroad and, you know, our practice, which is all 15, 20 years in the making. So that then sort of feeds back into academic environments. I teach once in a while, I don't know if they do. And it's only to have these conversations with students saying that, because the education, the structure of it isn't really keeping up, in all honesty. But I think is these sort of mini movements within some schools in the country which are really challenging now these conventional notions. And I think that's very interesting as well.
Yeah, and again, you know, it's a necessity, I think, and I like the mini movements. Those, I mean, hopefully those are growing and growing and growing, right, and become something more. And I think what's really important, which other colleagues of yours have brought up as well, is the fact that there are so many young practices, right, that are doing great work. And I think it's very important what you said earlier about the fact that smaller projects, residential projects, get more attention, but the fact that, you know, these bigger developments, public spaces that are being thought out in a very, and you mentioned contextually sensitive, which I love, that is not being highlighted as much. And I think, you know, hopefully, and I'm glad I'm talking to you guys about this, because I can maybe help also by elevating these narratives, you know, and maybe giving them words in a way, or framing them in a way that also makes those stories, amplifies those stories, which I think is that's the power that we have in our case as journalists and as a magazine, to kind of elevate that and publish and push it out into the world.
There are some pretty powerful projects, even civic and public in nature, that are happening in India right now. But I think what happens is eventually there's a sense of incompleteness about them sometimes. You know, it's just nature of our work there. They get stuck in time, they get stuck in bureaucracy. But the stories are great to tell, because accomplishing anything in our country, it's a complex ecosystem. We have to battle several sort of parameters. So I think in that sense, those stories must be told. And really, I mean, it has to happen in platforms like these.
So I'd like to add, you know, so we've come to terms with the fact that architecture is a slow profession in our country. It's going to take time, but I think what's most heartening is that, you know, the buildings will stand, and these buildings will stand the test of time. So they will eventually speak for themselves. Obviously, I mean, we need you guys to sort of come and see the success of those projects, but I'm genuinely optimistic that, you know, eventually people will sort of see these successful projects stand the test of time, and also, you know, in all sort of success in every sort of term, you know, whether you sort of test it on any parameter of sustainability, of economy, of, you know, people involvement or civic engagement, they will sort of stand the test of time.
Definitely. And I think it's also important to not just have, you know, parameters imprinted on the projects, but maybe also have parameters come out of the projects, right? So they're truly of Indian heritage, of like a project that's local and not just something that is, like rules or bureaucracy. We mentioned policy. We'll talk about that in a second.
And then another thing I would like to add is
Yeah, of
even
course.
when you do a project, I mean, a lot of architects, we actually miss how to document a project well. I mean, suppose I need to submit for Archidalia for publication or any other international magazines. The documentation also, a lot of architects, I mean, we've been learning, but still a lot of architects, they've done good work and their works have been not published because they don't know how to
Because the
document
visuals
it.
are missing, yeah.
Yeah, so that's also we need to actually impress Indian architects. So then we would have a lot of publications from Indian work,
Yeah, no, for
globally.
sure. I mean,
Yeah.
it is, and I've spoken to your colleagues about this also. There was a session that we had about, why has the world become so image focused? It's unfortunately just a matter of fact that it has, at least at this current point in time. And I think it's completely right what you're saying is that that's a, that is also a skill outside of the putting into words and the phrasing the narrative. The visual aspect, whether it be fantastic, it doesn't have to be a fantastical building, right? But the qualities of that building, whether they're, granular or on a macro level, have to visually be transported in some way without, because we unfortunately don't all have the possibility to go and see, anytime.
Yeah.
I want to experience a project. I don't want to see it in pictures. In an ideal case, I think all of us do, right?
Yeah.
We
of
all
course.
we have to experience, we have to physically be within a space to experience scale, to experience air, but I think that is the closest we'll get to that without being physically there, is having photography, having, narrative that describes, transports that feeling in some way.
Unfortunately, not all the materials can be good photographed.
Yes.
They have
Some
the
have to
specific
be
materials
experienced.
which
Materials have their own sort
yeah.
thermal properties of a material or acoustic properties of a material, right? Which can't be sort of captured in a photograph. But I think, if your buildings start becoming that powerful, that the images themselves are so powerful that they sort of send that intriguing message across, I think that should at least send the global invitation for people to come and experience those projects. I think it's right now we are at a juncture where we are sort of sending those invitations across, making those buildings powerful enough for people to take note. And eventually they will.
More invitations now.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's what we are doing. And that's how people are sort of catching the attention, because our buildings are becoming that powerful. Maybe they always were, but now sort of, we are learning the skill of documenting, I don't know what, but even as younger and younger practices are growing, the focus on sort of genuinely creating that experiential architecture is growing also very strongly. And the other advantage is that, a lot of the young practices, we can test those ideas on a smaller scale before we can actually do it on a larger scale. So by the time we are actually doing it on a larger scale, we've sort of achieved that kind of perfection to do it. Because, you always start a practice doing some interiors and then you eventually graduate to doing residences and larger institutional work. And in a span of about a decade and a half, you're already doing, if the practice is growing well, you're already doing some super large scale works. And also your hands are pretty sort of free and practiced in doing that. So those invitations are still going on now.
Buildings always were or have been that powerful for a long time. I think again, it comes back to what you were saying at the beginning of, the spatial design, the function has always been excellent, right? It's just, it's the narrative that hasn't been there necessarily. And I mean, this is the case not just for India, but for a lot of other countries, that are not so central in the West, where and are not so close together. I mean, Europe is a very unique, I think, potpourri of design and architecture, which is why Milan is often so, Eurocentric in a way, and that's changing, and that's wonderful because I think, we all need to learn. It comes back down to exchanging ideas and education and learning from each other, and not in a way that's we're imposing ideas onto each other that have come from one central place, but true exchange of knowledge, I think, is key, for sure. We're going to keep on going with I love going on tangents, so it's lovely.
Can I add something to that? Can I add something to what you were saying? So the idea is India is also a very diverse country. It's like you've got these 10 different climatic zones, you've got this different topography, you've got different cultural habits. So when you're practicing in India, if you're practicing in a different, like you're stationed and in the next place and you're working 100 kilometers away, it could be a completely different context. And if you're working 200 kilometers away, it's going to be a completely different climatic zone, cultural context, economic context, everything is different. So also, what happens is a lot of these Indian practices, a lot of us, sort of have that ability to adapt and adapt very quickly.
I'd love to hear from both of you on that point, because I think this is something, if you could teach the global stage a little bit more, if there was like a notion, like what you just said, about what Indian practice is like, not just about, the grandeur and the different contexts, what would that be for you? You've just answered that, I think, lovely, yeah. But for the two of you, what would that be?
I agree with them. I think we operate, with a very high degree of flexibility. We are able to sort of shift tactics very swiftly in our practices. Also, another thing that he touched upon is, as a young practice, you could start with a room, and in no time, in 4 or 5 years, you could be building out a campus with no formal real training, because you don't get that in your academic setting a lot. It means that there's a lot of self-education. You're kind of learning on the ropes, but you have to adapt super quick. And I think that's sort of a quality that's ingrained in us. I think it's a kind of cultural thing as well, to make do with very little, to adapt very quickly, different situations, so we can get very agile in that sense, I think. Yeah, and I think that's something that is another great conversation to have in comparison to what happens in the West, right? With the sort of search for very high refinement, perfection, which is great as well. It's beautiful, but I think the way we deal with it is very different. Our intent is also the same, but we're okay with projects sort of going off in tangents, like
I was going to say, with a less formal way of getting to the same goal.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, yeah,
like the precision is the same.
Yes, that's right.
But it's a different road.
Yes, because we play many roles in our projects. We're architects, we're counselors, we're also dealing with other disciplines. Mm-hmm. So it's a very sort of multifaceted position that we take, in that hierarchy. We're right on top in a project sometimes, driving various aspects of a project that don't necessarily fall in our purview, but we do anyway.
In the purview of a more, of a Western architect, maybe, because I was because I was talking to your colleagues about this, where even the if people are listening to all of these podcasts, they're going to be sick of me saying this, but the fact that multi-generational housing and the fact that you become a family architect, that is not something that happens in the West. That you produce a house for parents, you don't think about the generation after, you're not thinking about what happens when something moves out, one member of the family comes back with children, maybe with a wife, with a husband. So those are things, and the counseling aspect, which was something that I learned from talking to your colleagues, and the fact that you're staying with families for so long, and you're included in so many decisions that affect their lives so intimately. That is something that I think is wonderful, right? You have your colleagues are saying you have a family doctor, and then you have the family architect, which I love, which again is something that's not so prevalent here, which I think makes for a different type of design and a different evolution, especially when it comes obviously to residential projects.
Yes, yeah, and the residential project in India is a sort of is almost the microcosm of all work in India in some sense. The sort of tradition, the values, and all of that is very highly invested in a home. Right. So I think that's a good start to actually understand how architects function. That prototype of really building a home. So I think everything that you said is very accurate. We do all of this, I think, when we're dealing with projects in India, and then sort of scales up depending on what project we're doing. I think the role essentially remains pivotal in that sense. So I joke with my clients as well. We're as important to you as your doctor and your lawyer, for those 2 or 3 years, and maybe even beyond, because they're actually reaching out to you. They become your friend for life after that. And they're reaching out to you for 10 years later, saying, I have a little something not
Which
working.
keeps you connected to your projects.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So we build a very wide network that way across our lives. Yeah.
Also, okay, so also, because sometimes you're actually building for 4 generations, living in the same place. I don't think it gets any more complex than that, because you have a 2-year-old and you have a 85-year-old living in the same house. And, also the understanding of public and private, how much interaction you need and how much privacy you need. It's like you can replicate the same thing on any scale. And you can sort of understand that complexity on any different scale, because I think essentially most successful projects are about that understanding of what is to be exposed and what is to be hidden at a certain level. So you can test, again I come back to what I said earlier, so you can test your ideas at a much smaller scale to sort of be implemented on a larger scale.
When it comes to homes in India, so I think, as you said, Aman said, people start designing homes for their even grandchildren, the next generations. So that's one thing. And I think in the 90s, 1980s, and I think there were not kids involved in the design. Nowadays, like even a 7-year-old kid comes to the office when they
That's
design
right,
a
I've
home.
heard.
And then they clearly know what they want. So that's another extra thing we have to. So when it comes to how we negotiate, how we counsel with the families, and it's not about one space. Every space, it's the same thing. And for us, it's becoming, like I say always, as an architect now, I am a CEO, I am a CFO. When it comes to finances, I am a design manager. When it comes to project, I'm a project manager. So I'm doing everything. Despite having, like say 100 architects or 50 architects, but still you need to do everything as being a principal of the firm. So this is not very common in West.
No, it's not.
This is not very common in West for us, because it's more, our practices are more like one architect oriented. Like if it is me, okay, I have my own firm, it's oriented. So we don't have, in India, it's not still, we don't have those associates, like architects associates. Very few of them, very few large firms have, but I think most of us are very independent firms operating.
Do you think that's always a good thing? And this can be a question to all of you, or do you feel like maybe there needs to be a shift in that instance,
there
more
needs
towards
to
the
be a shift.
global?
There needs to be a shift so that you can work more. You can work on more projects. You can do better work, because when it's a group and you interact. So we do have some associates now, but most of the decisions the principal architects would be taking, but not like Western architecture where they're giving independent roles, independent everything. So we have that shift. It's been happening from last 15 years, but still not on par with the Western thing. Yeah.
But that was a conscious decision that I sort of took when I started my practice, because the first vision statement that we wrote for our practice is like, the practice is to last much longer than I do. Okay, and that's how I'm glad I have 2 partners now. They just started working with us. So the firm is only about 18 years old, but they've been working with us for 15 years now. They've become a part of the practice. So I think it's a mindset that sort of we developed, where we sort of get out of that idea of a star architect's mindset and instead do buildings and build practices that can sort of serve much longer, serve longer than our lifetime, build projects that serve much, much longer than our lifetime.
Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it was so much, in those cases, I don't think it was so much a star architect thing. I think it was just this a very also culturally ingrained thing of you need like a leading person to make the decisions, right? I think, and maybe this is something that's now becoming a little bit more malleable, where you have, exchange, you have multiple, associates or team members that have a bigger portion of responsibility, maybe, that get to shape projects together. Is that correct, or?
Well, I think there are a lot of factors you can sort of attribute to this change, but I think exposure is one of them to a lot of media, and a lot of these younger kids, they know so many things that as architects from a previous generation you wouldn't know. right? Whether it's your presentation skill or whether it's like using softwares or whatever, the shift has happened so quickly that empowering these youngsters is become a part of how the practice would function, right? Whether it happens generationally in some cases or whether by getting associates in other cases. But I think it's the need of the hour in any way. But, having a core vision to a practice is essential for creating that kind of environment where people sort of associate with that sort of core value.
I think most of the Indian firms had this issue of repeated clients. I wouldn't say it's an issue, but it's a boon for us. So we normally, suppose I do for a developer and he likes work, he keeps on giving us work.
Right.
So what happens when I was the front face for the first project of that particular developer? He would expect me to lead all his projects.
Right. Okay.
So that is another where we are being not able to associate. Have more associates. Even if you have more good associates and more major decisions, they would say, okay, I want you to be there.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So without actually knowing the architect or knowing the associate how well he is, how good he is. So that is another reason I think as an Indian practices where most of the successful Indian practices have repeated clients.
Right.
So most of them, like who are doing on a big scale. So it's all about having repeated, mostly on the real estate sector.
Because it comes down to the personal relationship that we touched upon earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just thinking with them on this. I'm not sure we've actually figured out the right template for continuity within the practice. This is an issue actually because you start independently and then you kind of become the face of the practice, and then to create credibility across the firm after a certain period of time, especially when you cross that 15, 20-year-old threshold, is a bit of a challenge. And I don't know whether there again there's another way to do it in India, because there are several dynamics at play. Our pay scales are very different compared to the West. Retention is a problem because talent is now getting better, but it's otherwise a little scarce. There's a lot of learning on the ropes. So someone comes in, you have to invest in them for maybe 6 months, a year, bring them up to speed on the work that's happening in the office. So this is again part of that earlier conversation on this is all, I think, a larger project. This is all work in progress, but I think we're getting there. Like in my own practice, I can speak for myself. I'm seeing a noticeable shift in the last 5 years in how the youngsters think, and they bring a kind of freshness to the firm. So we invest in talent that is sort of maybe goes past people who've stayed with us a little longer, just to sort of fast track them into, pushing the firm's interest forward. So it's a kind of, it's all in flux right now, but I think it'll happen eventually.
It's in flux, but I think it's also like there's a lot happening, which is a positive movement for all of you.
It's all part of the movement.
Exactly. Well, thank you. I'm going to ask the fun question now for wrapping up. And thank you all, because that was truly very interesting to hear from all of you. I hope that was fruitful for you as well. But I guess if you could design a room of dreams with no limitations, you can give one-word answers, you can give one-sentence answers, but what would be the first element that you place or maybe take away? We can start with you and work our way.
For me, like the concept of like a flying room, like a drone room. I could stay wherever I want. I could position myself there for a few days and then again move. So, yeah.
Flexibility.
Nice.
Thank you.
I have a slightly skewed view of this. I'm imagining a room that has a lot of crevices and cracks. And I think it's because it'll allow me to sort of pause and reflect on the defects in a space. And I think that's just engagement. It's like when you dream, it's there's sort of delay. It's you can't really tell what's happened when you suddenly wake up, right? It's then that state of complete, call it, I don't know, like paralysis for a bit, right? And I think that is, I liken that to a space that's going to allow me to do the same, which sort of keeps me engaged and surprises me and allows me to sort of, look at it and stare at it a lot longer. I don't know whether that's a little vague, but yeah.
Love vague, abstract. No, I thought that was beautiful. Thank you.
I'd punch some holes in the roof So, you have some solid light, light almost becomes like a material inside the room. It's like if you have solid light in sort of a translucent light where you have a sense of time, your sense of movement, because that's one thing that's going to constantly keep changing, right? And the experience keeps changing with the days, with the seasons.
Holes in the ceiling. I like it. Thank you so much.
Thank
That was
you.
lovely.
Thanks so much, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.